Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it so quietly that I almost wondered if I'd misheard. But the words cut through me sharper than if she'd screamed. I miss being wanted. You're just a dad now. I was standing in the nursery, rocking our daughter in my arms, her tiny body pressed against my chest. The hum of the sound machine filled the silence. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My jaw tightened, my grip on the baby steady, but inside something cracked. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling her iPhone with one hand, a half-finished Starbucks cup on the nightstand. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Just a throwaway comment. Like I wasn't a man anymore, just a utility. A background character in her story. I stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room. She looked the same as always, her hair done, skin glowing, wearing one of those soft, old navy sweaters she loved. But the way she glanced at me, the weight behind those words, it wasn't the same woman I thought I married. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because for the first time, I realized talking wouldn't change a thing. Something in her had shifted. Later that night, while I put the baby down, I replayed her words over and over. You're just a dad now. Not a husband. Not a man. Just a dad. The phrase hollowed me out, but it also lit a strange, unfamiliar calm. At dinner, she laughed too loudly at her phone, typing fast, smiling at something I wasn't part of. She didn't notice that I barely touched the food. She didn't notice that I was watching, quietly, like a shadow at the edge of our own life. When we climbed into bed, I didn't lie next to her. I took the blanket and moved to the couch in the living room. She didn't ask why. She didn't even look up from the glow of her screen. That silence was louder than anything either of us could have said. In that moment, I stopped fighting. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped begging for her attention, her touch, her respect. Something inside me turned cold. I wasn't gone yet, but I was no longer playing the role she'd written for me. And for the first time in months, I slept. The next morning, she moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened. She poured coffee into her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle, and scrolled Amazon while the baby kicked in her playpen. Her voice was casual when she asked if I could pick up diapers from Walmart later, as if the night before hadn't shattered something between us. I answered with a single word. Sure. No argument, no smile, no warmth. Just flat. She didn't even glance at me, too busy laughing at a text that lit up her screen. Something had changed in me overnight. I no longer planned our weekends in my head, no longer thought of ways to bring us closer, no longer felt the need to prove I was more than the role she shoved me into. Instead, I pulled back quietly, moving in smaller, sharper ways. I started sleeping in the guest room. I kept my responses short, clipped, detached. She noticed, but not in the way you'd expect. At first, she seemed relieved. Fewer questions from me, fewer attempts to reach her. But silence has weight, and the more I gave her space, the heavier it got. At dinner with friends that weekend, I watched her lean into conversations that had nothing to do with me. She laughed too brightly, her hand brushing her hair back the way she used to when she wanted attention. Someone asked me about work, and I gave the shortest answer possible. Her eyes flicked toward me, confused, as if she expected me to fill the room like I once did. Instead, I sat still, quiet, a shadow. That night, she climbed into our bed while I stayed on the couch. She didn't say a word about it. She didn't even try to pull me back. But here's the thing, silence builds. It becomes a mirror. And soon, she was the one starting to notice what was missing. I'd catch her looking at me when she thought I wasn't watching, her expression unreadable. Maybe curious, maybe unsettled. But she didn't ask questions. Not yet. One evening, while the baby slept, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood in the doorway of the living room. She stared at me as I scrolled through my phone. Finally, she broke the silence with a soft laugh, almost forced. You're so quiet lately. I didn't answer, just nodded once and went back to my screen. She left the room, slower than usual, and for the first time in months, it felt like she was the one chasing something she couldn't catch. And I wasn't about to make it easy. The family photo shoot was supposed to be a celebration. Our daughter had just turned 6 months, and she'd picked out matching outfits, soft beige tones, the kind of thing people post on Facebook to prove their happiness. I went along, dressed in the shirt she laid out, carrying the diaper bag like always. I didn't argue, didn't complain. I just moved through it like an actor reading lines from a script. The photographer, a young woman with too much energy, guided us into position. First the three of us together, then a few of just the baby. I held my daughter carefully, feeling her small hands clutch at my shirt. For a brief moment, I almost forgot everything. Then it happened. The photographer suggested a couple shot, something with just the parents. I shifted, ready to move closer, but she cut me off without hesitation. Can we get one with just me and the baby? Her voice was calm, almost cheerful, but those words froze me in place. Just her and the baby. Like I was an accessory that didn't belong. The photographer hesitated, her smile faltering for a second, but then adjusted the camera as if it was normal. I stepped back, feeling the world tighten around me. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I simply handed her the diaper bag, placed my daughter gently in her arms, and walked away. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I left the photo session. I could hear the click of the camera behind me, laughter echoing faintly, but it all sounded far away. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and closed the door. Silence. My phone buzzed. A text from her. Where are you going? We're not done. I stared at the screen, but didn't reply. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine. The studio lights glowed in the rearview mirror as I drove away, each mile putting distance between me and the image she wanted to create. For the first time, I felt a strange kind of freedom. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was the realization that I no longer needed to hold on to a version of us that didn't exist anymore. That night, when she came home with the baby, she avoided my eyes. She busied herself in the kitchen, clattering dishes louder than necessary, as if the noise could cover the silence between us. I stayed on the couch, arms crossed, staring at the wall. She wanted a perfect photo without me in it. She got it, and I made sure she saw how easily I could erase myself from her frame. The silence after the photo shoot lingered like smoke in the house. Days passed, but we barely spoke. She acted as if nothing had happened, filling her schedule with errands and outings. She posted pictures of herself and the baby on Facebook, all smiles and perfect angles, captions full of love and light. None of them included me. My mother noticed first. She stopped by one afternoon while I was in the yard fixing the old Ford F-150. She handed me a bottle of water, studying my face the way only a mother can. After a long pause, she said quietly, "Don't shrink just to keep a home whole." She didn't push further. She didn't need to. The words stayed with me long after she left. Later that week, one of her friends stopped me at the grocery store. I had the baby in the cart, stacking diapers and formula, while she was off wandering the aisles with her phone pressed to her ear. Her friend leaned close, lowering her voice. "You're pushing him out," she told her. Not to me, but to my wife, who flushed and pretended not to hear. And then my best friend, Mark, came over for a game one night. We sat on the couch with a couple of beers, the TV glowing in the background. He looked at me, really looked, and shook his head. "You used to laugh, man. Now you apologize for existing." Each comment from the people around us hit differently. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't pity. It was truth spoken out loud, and she heard it too. I watched her stiffen, watched her retreat into herself, watched her act as though everyone else was exaggerating. But I could see the flicker in her eyes, the flash of discomfort she couldn't hide. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I let other people's words sink in where mine no longer mattered. And in that quiet, she started to notice the way I'd pulled away. One night, after we put the baby to bed, she lingered in the doorway. She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. I waited for her to speak, but she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked back down the hall. That was the moment I realized the dynamic had shifted. For months, I'd been the one reaching, apologizing, trying to bridge the gap. Now, she was the one staring into the silence, sensing that I was no longer holding on. And that silence was no longer just mine. It was hers too. I began to live a parallel life, one that didn't orbit around her moods or her silence. It started small. I signed up for a gym membership, slipping out early in the mornings before she even woke. The clang of weights, the burn in my muscles, the sweat soaking into my shirt, those became mine alone. No one could take that from me. After that, I booked a few sessions with a therapist. I didn't tell her. I didn't need her approval. I just sat in that quiet office, speaking truths I hadn't dared say at home. The therapist didn't give me solutions, just space. And in that space, I found a piece of myself again. At work, I stopped playing it safe. I'd been holding on to a job that kept me close to home, predictable hours, predictable pay. But one day, after another night of silence in the house, I updated my resume and started looking for something bigger. Within weeks, I had an offer. Higher pay, more responsibility, a position that made me stand taller when I walked into a room. She noticed. Of course she noticed. The late nights at the gym. The quiet confidence creeping back into my voice. The way I no longer asked what she wanted for dinner, but made my own plate and ate it without waiting. She didn't say anything at first, but I could feel her watching me. One evening, while I was lacing my sneakers before heading out, she finally asked, "Where are you going?" "Gym," I said. Just that. No explanation, no apology. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe even fear. For the first time in a long while, it felt like she didn't know me. And that scared her more than my silence ever did. She tried to joke about it once, saying I was turning into someone else. But her laughter was nervous, her eyes sharp, searching. Because the truth was, I wasn't turning into someone else. I was becoming who I used to be, before she decided I was only a father, not a man. And the more I pulled back, the more she leaned in, not with warmth but with unease. Her control over me was slipping, and she could feel it. Every step I took into that parallel life, stronger, colder, more independent, wasn't just a step away from her. It was a reminder that I didn't need her permission to exist. And that was something she couldn't stand. Her unease grew with every quiet step I took away from her. At first, she dismissed it, telling herself I was just in a phase. But silence doesn't fade, it spreads. Soon it was visible to everyone else. At a family dinner, my sister leaned across the table and asked her if everything was okay between us. The room went still for a moment, forks frozen above plates. She smiled too quickly, brushing it off, but her voice shook when she said, "Of course, we're fine." My sister didn't look convinced. Neither did anyone else. Later that week, she went out with her friends, leaving me home with the baby. When she came back, I was sitting on the couch, the baby asleep on my chest, a game paused on the screen. She stood in the doorway, just watching. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that the picture-perfect family she'd been posting about online wasn't holding together. Not because of me leaving, but because of me pulling away. The cracks spread further at her workplace too. She worked closely with a new project manager, a man who was louder, flashier, the type to always be the center of attention. I saw his name pop up on her phone more than once, casual texts that lingered longer than they should. She laughed too brightly when she read them, like she was trying to convince herself of something. When I finally met him, at a company picnic, I shook his hand, looked him straight in the eye, and said nothing more than his name. He smiled too wide, talking too much, but I just stood there, calm, detached. My silence made him fidget. She noticed. She noticed everything. What unsettled her most wasn't that I confronted him. I didn't. What unsettled her was that I didn't need to. I wasn't competing. I wasn't asking where she'd been or who she'd been texting. I didn't chase, didn't demand. I just existed outside her control. And that silence was heavier than any accusation I could have thrown at her. Over the next weeks, the whispers started. Her friends asking why she seemed distracted, her coworkers wondering why I wasn't at the gatherings anymore, my family noticing the hollow edge to her laugh. And when one of her closest friends finally said it out loud, "You're pushing him out," I saw her face pale. She wanted to deny it, wanted to laugh it off. But she couldn't, because deep down, she already knew. And for the first time, it wasn't me losing ground. It was her. The man from her office didn't last long. 3 weeks, maybe less. I never asked about him, never questioned her late nights or the way her phone would light up face down on the table. I didn't need to. People like him always reveal themselves. And when it ended, it wasn't a slow fade. It was brutal, sharp, final. I only knew because one evening she stood in the kitchen with her wine glass trembling in her hand. Her voice was low, flat, not meant for me, but loud enough for me to hear. "You don't want love," he had told her. "You want leverage." I didn't comment. I just kept washing the dishes, the clatter of water louder than her silence. She turned, maybe expecting comfort, maybe waiting for me to step in the way I used to. But I didn't. I dried my hands on a towel, walked past her, and picked up our daughter from her crib. She followed me with her eyes, but said nothing. The next days, the cracks spread faster. She grew restless, pacing the house with her phone in hand, messaging no one, calling no one, looking for someone to anchor her. But there was no one left. Her friends had grown distant, tired of her complaints. Even her mother, once her strongest ally, had begun to notice the strain. I overheard it one Sunday on the phone, her mother's voice sharp and disappointed. "You've changed, and not for the better." That night, she sat on the couch, staring at me while I read through a stack of work papers. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling like the glass she held. "Can we start over?" Her words hung in the air, but I didn't look up immediately. I finished reading the line on the page, set the papers down, and then turned to her. Her eyes were wide, desperate, like she was waiting for me to save her from the weight of her own choices. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, let her sit in it the way I had for months. Then I gave the smallest nod, not of agreement, but of acknowledgement. She seemed almost relieved, but the truth was clear. She wasn't asking for love. She was asking for stability, and I wasn't going to give it on her terms anymore. When she asked to start over, I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just watched her, the weight of silence pressing down harder than any words could. For the first time in a long time, she was the one waiting, her fingers nervously gripping the stem of her wine glass, her eyes searching mine for something to hold on to. The next day, I gave her an answer, not with flowers, not with promises, but with a plan. I told her calmly, without hesitation, what starting over would look like. Separate living arrangements. A custody agreement for our daughter. Shared weekends. But no more control games, no more hidden resentments. Her face went pale. She blinked, shaking her head like she hadn't heard me correctly. "That's not a marriage," she whispered. I stayed still, my voice even. "It wasn't. You just didn't notice." The words hit her harder than any argument we'd ever had. She looked away, pressing her lips together, as if the truth had been sitting there all along and she had finally been forced to see it. For days after, she tried to soften her tone with me. She lingered in the kitchen when I cooked. She asked small questions about work, about the gym, about my mother. But her voice carried hesitation, like she was speaking to someone who no longer belonged to her world. And she was right. I didn't. Even our daughter seemed to feel the shift. She would crawl into my lap, her tiny fingers tugging at my shirt, her head resting against my chest. Those moments were mine, and mine alone. Not because I pulled them away from her mother, but because I was no longer willing to let anyone redefine what kind of father I was going to be. The house grew colder, not from shouting or slammed doors, but from the quiet clarity that things would never return to how they had been. She looked at me differently now, not with disdain, not with superiority, but with a cautious respect she hadn't shown in months. It wasn't fear of losing me. It was the realization that she already had. And still, I didn't leave. I stayed. But I stayed on new ground, ground I had drawn myself. For the first time, she understood. If there was to be a future, it would not be on her terms. It would be on mine. The collapse didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, through small humiliations she couldn't control. At first, it was the way people looked at her differently. At the grocery store, one of her friends walked past and barely acknowledged her. At work, conversations grew shorter, more professional, less warm. She had always thrived on attention, but now it slipped through her hands like water. I didn't have to say a word. The distance I created was doing all the work. She tried to regain control in subtle ways, planning dinners, suggesting trips, asking if I wanted to watch a show together. But her voice carried a fragility, like she was testing the weight of every sentence before she spoke. And I responded the same way I had been for weeks, calm, measured, distant. One evening, she broke. Not with anger, but with something heavier. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face, and whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." Her shoulders trembled, and for the first time, I saw her without the walls she had built around herself. She wasn't strong. She wasn't in control. She was lost. I didn't move toward her. I didn't offer comfort. I sat in the chair across the room, arms folded, watching quietly. The silence between us was unbearable for her, but for me, it was steady. Solid. Over the next days, I saw memories hit her like sudden flashes. The way I used to laugh with her on late drives, the way I carried her inside when she fell asleep on the couch, the way I stayed up all night with the baby so she could rest. Back then, she brushed those things aside, treated them like background noise. Now, they returned to her as sharp reminders of what she had lost. Each time reality struck her, I saw her flinch. A song on the radio, a commercial for Olive Garden, where she once told me I was just convenient. A pair of tiny shoes in the hallway. She remembered, piece by piece, the man she had taken for granted. And each memory cut deeper because now, she could see clearly, I wasn't begging to come back. I was already gone. Not from my daughter, never from her, but from the role she had tried to trap me in. And that was a loss she couldn't undo. The final shift came quietly, without a fight, without an explosion. One evening, after our daughter had fallen asleep, she stood in the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she held onto the back of the couch. Her voice was soft, broken in a way I had never heard before. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. I looked at her, calm, steady, unmoved by the tremor in her voice. For months, I had carried the weight of her indifference, her words cutting into me, her silence louder than anything else. But now, the balance had reversed. She was exposed, stripped of the control she once wielded. I didn't rush to close the gap between us. I didn't offer the easy comfort she expected. Instead, I stood where I was, arms crossed, letting the silence stretch. She was waiting for me to rescue her from herself, but I wasn't that man anymore. Finally, I spoke, my voice even, almost detached. "I'm not leaving our daughter. I'll always be her father, but I won't live in the role you forced me into." She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening, her breath unsteady. For once, she had no answer. No defense, just silence. I stepped past her, picked up my jacket from the chair, and headed toward the door. She turned quickly, panic flashing across her face. "So what does this mean?" she asked, her voice breaking. I paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked at her one last time. "It means there's a chance to rebuild, but only on new ground. Respect, mutual effort, honesty. If you can't give that, then it's already over." Her shoulders sank as she absorbed my words. For the first time in months, she didn't argue, didn't deflect, didn't hide behind her phone or her friends. She simply nodded, quietly, as though she finally understood what it meant to lose me. I walked out that night, not as a man broken or discarded, but as a father stronger than before, a man who had drawn his own lines. The driveway felt different, freer. My Ford F-150 sat waiting under the streetlight, and as I opened the door, I realized something important. I hadn't left my family. I had left the version of myself she tried to reduce me to. And if there was a future with her, it would no longer be built on convenience or control. It would be built on respect. And this time, it would be on my terms. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.